Hi, I'm Christina, and this is episode 2 of Desert Agave Fiber Arts. I'm a Latinx, fat, bipolar writer and fiber artist with PTSD. I grew up in Wisconsin, but I've lived in New Mexico since 1998. I've been a writer since about forever, and I only started doing fiber arts in 2021, and I came to knitting and spinning last year in 2023. Exploring my creativity through the fiber arts has reinvigorated my writing and led me away from trauma and depression and towards joy. In this podcast, I might discuss embroidery, sewing, knitting, spinning, wool processing, and mental health. I'm not an expert in any of these, but my process of discovery, experimentation, and wild leaps into the dark bring me joy, and I hope to share that with you. For the first part of this podcast, we'll do finished object story time, and I wanted to share what I'm wearing. This is my most recent finished garment. It was also a test knit, and it is Samantha Guerin's Springline Tee. I made it using Knitting for Olives cotton merino in ochre. It was my first time knitting with any kind of cotton. This was a cotton wool blend, of course, and I liked it better than I thought I would. I think the 30% merino really helped it be a little bit elastic and not too hard on my hands. I got it done a week after the test knit deadline, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about test knitting and my thoughts about it later on, but that's part of why I'm sharing it today, is I thought since I was going to talk about test knitting, I would share my most recent test knit and one where I did not make the deadline. Samantha Guerin was very gracious about it, but I am a person who really likes to keep my responsibilities. That's always been important to me. And so it was, I felt bad about not making the deadline, basically. But I really am enjoying the top. It gets hot in New Mexico. In most summer days, it's in the high 90s to low 100s, it seems like these days. And a lot of things that work for some people in the summer don't work here in the summer. For instance, the first summer top I knit was in linen quill, Pearl Soho's linen quill, and I've seen a lot of people say that that's a fiber that works for them in the summer. I find linen quill, for me, it works when the temperatures are in the 70s or the low 80s, and I guess for some people that's their summer. But once it gets up to the 90s and 100, it's just too hot to wear that. So I still love the top I made in linen quill. I'll share it with you some other time. But for me, it's more of a fall, winter if I layer something over it, or a spring knit. It's not something that I wear in the summer. I'm still waiting to see how well this top will hold up when it's 100 degrees out, especially since I tend to layer it over something else just because of it's fairly cropped and that's how I prefer to wear it. But so far it's doing better as far as the heat goes than the linen quill does, which makes sense because linen quill has a little bit of linen and mostly wool and alpaca, and those are just warm fibers. The more I learned about fibers as I knitted my linen quill top, the more I wondered to myself, how are wool and alpaca that's supposed to be warmer than wool really going to be something I'm going to want to wear in the summer? And sure enough, once I finished it, I realized that it wasn't, for me, it wasn't a summertime knit. I've also got a recently finished object here, or more recently, and just as I said, you'll remember last time my practically perfect socks were in the process of being cast off. Well, now they are finished socks. I don't have them on sock blockers for you, I'm sorry. I have to admit, I was so excited about finishing them that I have already worn them. I wore them basically the day after I wove in all the ends, which was funny because it was a little too hot for socks, but I couldn't help it. I was excited. I really like how they turned out. They're a perfect fit, and I had a lot of fun with the yarn, which is Woolens and Nosh, which is my favorite striping yarn, self-striping yarn. And the pattern was Practically Perfect Socks by Maple Tree Lane & Co. Really nice pattern, helped me get that perfect fit on my feet. It's a toe up pattern, and this is my second pair of socks I've knitted toe up, and I really like toe up. Not for any of the practical reasons that I hear most people talk about. For me, it was more that the casting on just a tiny little number of stitches and then gradually increasing them into a circular toe, that is like pure magic for me. I love that wacky little cast on, and then suddenly, a few minutes later, you've got this little circular piece of fabric in between your needles. That is just so fun for me. I'm kind of like a kid sometimes with my making, and I've stopped being embarrassed about that. I think that's part of what makes it magic for me. But really happy with those. Gonna wear them once it cools down, and I actually had them here in my bag that holds every pair of socks I've ever made for myself, including another Woolens and Nosh pair. This was the first pair of socks I ever knit last spring. They actually don't fit me. I made a size medium, and it turns out that my feet are quite large, and they need a size large width. But I still like to keep them even though they won't go on my feet. Maybe someday I'll give them to somebody who they fit better. I have a lot of works in progress, and the first one is going to get me on the subject of test knitting. I think I said last time that I was working on this test knit. It's for Jen at One Wild Designs. The pattern is called Who Can Stay, and it is a really lovely pattern. I'm making it in the yarn that she designed it in, which is the Forest Lane Fiber Co's Urbane Bronze and Rambouillet Sport. It's a woolen spun 2-ply yarn, really lovely texture. It's a sweater knitted in pieces. It's actually not the first time I've done that. I did another test knit for Jen in the fall where I made her breaker, which was also in pieces that you seam up. I know a lot of people seem intimidated by that. I don't think it's intimidating. I mean, breaker was literally the third sweater I ever made, and it was just follow the directions, take good measurements on your body, make sure to swatch, and it's very doable. And I came to knitting from sewing and embroidery, so the idea of seaming up pieces of knits just never seemed that intimidating to me. Now, one thing you might have noticed if you looked at that is I said that I needed to have the sweater done by the end of the month, and that's the back. I do have the front done. It sure doesn't look like I'm gonna have it done by the end of the month, does it? I'm gonna try as hard as I possibly can. I've been trying as hard as I can the whole time, but I finally had to admit to myself, I am not gonna make it. And that made me think a lot about test knitting, because my confession is this will be my third test knit in a row where I have not made the deadline. My first one was a test knit I started in January, also for Jen, and that one I just bit off more than I could chew. It was a beautiful sweater that she designed that's now out called Among Petals. It has lace, and it's beautiful lace. I jumped into that test knit having done only the teeny tiniest little bit of lace in the past. And I just figured, I don't know, at that point I was just like, I can do anything. I'll follow the directions, it'll be all good. And then at the end of 6 weeks, I was 12 rows into the pattern still, because I kept having to pull back and redo. And I was looking at the little bit of lace that I had, and I could tell it didn't look anything like anyone else's first 12 rows of the lace pattern. And I just realized I am not able to do this sweater yet. I need more experience with lace, and I had to kind of bow out. I felt bad about it. Jen, again, she was very gracious. But I really felt like I had been too ambitious, and therefore wasn't able to fill my responsibility that I had to her. Then the second test knit where I didn't make the deadline was this one. I came close within a week, but still, that's not quite it. Not quite enough. One of the things that taught me was that this was an 8-week test deadline, test knit duration. And for my size, I tend to knit one of the larger sizes, usually often a 6 or a 7 on top, and then I often grade out to an 8 or a 9 at the bottom because my hips are larger than my top. And for my size, my knitting speed, my experience, I just can't do a fingering weight sweater in 8 weeks. Apparently, if I really knit my heart out, I can do it in 9 weeks. But even that was rough, honestly. I knitted it at a slightly faster rate than was comfortable for me. And then this sweater, I figured, first of all, I'm knitting it for my husband, who's smaller than I am, so I'm knitting a smaller size. Instead of fingering weight, it's sport weight. I was like, I can knock this out. And I am not just knocking it out. It's not the pattern. It's a great pattern. Really enjoying it. I love the wool. I love the texture that I'm knitting. I've come to realize, partly because of this, that I think ADHD runs in my family, and I think I am one of the people who has it. And I just get distracted. You'll see that as I go along and show you all the other things I've been working on, is that I promised myself I was going to be spending almost all my making time on this sweater. And I really meant it, and I really felt like that's what I was doing. But as I look at all the things I've been working on for the last 2 weeks all together, it becomes clear to me that I was spending an awful lot of time on other things. And it's like I didn't realize that's what was happening. In a way, I feel like I couldn't exactly control it. I just, the whole time I've been devoting myself to fiber arts, I've told myself, follow your heart. And my heart gets hyper-focused, and then it skips around, and then it gets hyper-focused on something else, not necessarily the thing I meant to be hyper-focused on. And that's an issue. And I think it's an issue that has a name, ADHD. I actually talked to my therapist about it yesterday, and we agreed that at some point in the near future, we're gonna do an assessment and see if it's beyond a self-diagnosed thing. But yeah, so that's part of why I'm taking a break from test knitting. Once this sweater is done, it won't be done by the deadline, but I'll try to get it done as close to the deadline as I can, is that I feel bad not keeping my commitments to other people. That's sort of part of my core identity, that I'm a person that keeps my commitments to others. So even if the other person is lovely about it, it's not something that I feel great about. I think test knitting's important. That's part of why I started doing it so early into my knitting journey. The very third sweater that I made was that test knit, the breaker for Jen at One Wild. And I think that the test knitters have a responsibility to the designer, and also the designers have a really important responsibility to the test knitters. And it's a relationship, and it's a relationship that I take seriously. Except I feel like this year in 2024, I haven't been acting like I take it seriously. So I'm just gonna lay off from the test knitting process for a while until I feel really confident that there's a project that I will be able to tackle and stay focused on and all those things enough to do it. And I guess that's all I have to say for now about test knitting. I've written about it too. One Wild's newsletter published something that I wrote about a less good experience I had test knitting for a different designer, where I really felt like I was seen as lesser because of my size, and it was not a good feeling. Even though the garment that I ended up with is lovely, and I'll share it with you someday when it gets warmer. It's a bulky weight garment, so I'm not putting it on for you in June in New Mexico. But but that's all. I've already written about that off topic, so I'm not going to talk about it at great length now. Okay, next, a few of you said you really enjoyed seeing Toad, which is why I'm sorry to tell you poor Toad is not getting pulled out today because he did not get worked on in the last 2 weeks. Toad still does not have a face. He still does not have eyes. He's just sort of a limp little empty bag with no features, and I need to get him done soon, and I just have not done it. I know exactly why I haven't done it. It's because I'm dreading the eyes. The eyes mean knitting these tiny little circles and embroidering on them, and then steeking 2 little holes in his face and sewing them in. And I know I could do it. I did it for Frog, but it was not easy doing it for Frog. It involved some moments of freak out, and I really have to steel myself to do it to Toad. And also I need to have like at least 3 or 4 hours one morning to devote to it, and I haven't felt like I've had that recently. In addition to all of my crafting, I do volunteer writing for my Unitarian Universalist church. I do a lot of their fundraising writing. And June is kind of the big month for that. So I had 2 important things I was working on in this June for that. And a deadline that I gave to myself was Monday to get 2 different drafts done. And I got them done. I kept that responsibility, but it meant that I had less time for crafting than I realized I would. I don't know why I didn't realize it. I knew those deadlines were in June. I knew that June is sort of my busy writing season for that volunteer job, but somehow that was in a separate time box than my crafting time box, and I forgot that it's the same amount of time. There's not 2 different boxes full of time. Oh well. Another thing that I've been spending a lot of time doing is I spent more time processing Zella, the Shetland sheep. I took some of her wool that was scoured that I felt good about, and I spent a morning doing a lot of picking and then carding into roll eggs. I was happier with the roll eggs I managed to make this time. They're just fluffier and softer. The first batch of roll eggs that I made, you couldn't see it on video, but they all had this little hard core in the middle. It's like when I started rolling them up by hand, I started the first part twisted too tightly and it never untwisted. So every time I was spinning, I would get to that hard little core and it would become an issue. This new set of roll eggs, they're fluffy and lovely all the way through, and having a good time spinning them. I also looked at some more of her fleece that I had scoured. It was the first batch that I scoured as I was experimenting, and I was feeling it, and I could tell there was still more lanolin in it than I wanted, and also the tips were still so dirty that if I picked out the dirty tips, which is what I learned you're supposed to do, I would basically have nothing left. I would be surrounded by discarded wool with dirty tips, and I would have like maybe a little tiny tablespoon of wool to actually spin. So I decided to experiment with that part of Zella's fleece. So I put it in for another soak in preparation for scouring, and then kind of on purpose, kind of not, it's been sitting in its soaking water with a lid on it outside in the 90 to 100 degree heat for over a week now. That is kind of, I think, there's a kind of scouring of wool people do where they basically let it sit in dirty water for 2 weeks, and something about the lanolin and fermenting and all that good stuff actually cleans the wool. I don't know if that's going to work for me though, because 1, I don't know what I'm doing, and 2, this is wool that was already scoured once and only had a little lanolin in it. So I'm not sure if there's enough lanolin left for that self-cleaning water thing to work. But I'm just having a good time. I peek in on it every day or two to see how it's looking. And I think early next week, I will drain it and assess and see if it seems like maybe it's clean now, or if I should then do another scouring. It's all experimentation. I'm not stressing about it. It's just good fun. I do think once I finish that part of Zella's fleece, I may pivot to one of the other fleeces that I have. I bought a half fleece from Nystock Farms, a half fleece of a sheep called Ginger. She's a cross of a bunch of different things. And from what I've heard, Nystock Farms has lovely fleeces. A lot of people enjoy working with them. And I think next, my scouring and energy will go towards Ginger for a while. Just because for me, someone who's such a beginner at this, it's really been challenging having my first project this year being something that was Zella the sheep, who apparently was such a happy sheep. She spent a lot of time rolling in mud. I've also been doing a lot of spinning. First of all, as you might have guessed, I've been spending more time spinning those roll eggs that I made of Zella's fleece. I've been doing it on a spindle, a support spindle. This is a Slim Mary made by Mirkwood. It's just so enjoyable. The spindle is enjoyable. Even though my pool processing is not perfect, there's a fair number of neps in here, it's still really satisfying to spin something that I scoured and then picked and carded myself. Really good feeling, one I want more of, so I'm going to keep going with the scouring and the processing, even as I constantly have this feeling like, boy, I don't know what I'm doing. So I've been doing that. I also I did just a tiny bit of spinning of the same stuff because this was a new spindle that came and I just had to try it out. It's also a lovely spindle. I think the name of the maker is Woodland Woodworking, something like that. I may have that slightly wrong. I forgot to write it down, but I pre-ordered the spindle about 8 weeks ago and then it came, and really happy with it. One of the things, I kind of lost my head a little bit when I finally figured out how to support spindle, because I only had one support spindle when I learned how to support spindle, and that was about 2 months ago. Now suddenly I seem to have 10. Feel a little weird about that, but also very happy and giddy. Once I learned how to support spindle, I thought, whoo boy, well, I guess I need more support spindles. And then I realized that it's really hard to buy support spindles. There are more of us who like to spin with support spindles than there are people who make really good support spindles. So you've got places like the Spanish Peacock, where they do stealth releases that sell out within 60 seconds. You've got other places that do pre-orders, and then you wait 6 to 8 weeks for your spindle to come in. I think of those two, I kind of prefer the pre-order way, just because I'd rather be patient and wait 6 to 8 weeks than do sort of panic shopping, knowing that if I don't buy the first thing I see right now, it's probably all going to be sold out. That's hard for me. The Mirkwood, actually, these are mostly sold on Etsy, and they do sell, but they seem to sell a little bit slower. So this wasn't a panicked buy. This was more of a reasoned buy, but really glad I did. It's a nice spindle. This is another spindle that I pre-ordered. This is a spindle I pre-ordered on Etsy from Texas Jean. Look at that, it's a tulip on a green stem. This is such a nice spindle. It came on Monday, and I just knew I immediately had to try it. It's a little bit heavier than what I've been used to spinning with, but it has a great spin, and it's beautiful, and I decided to crack open something else precious that I had with it, which is, this is what she calls a merino mutt, dyed a soft yellow, and it's a woolen bat that I bought from Melly Knits. She's another one who's wildly popular. She's really got the reputation as having wool processing for woolen spinning down. And when she does releases, they also seem to sell out in like 60 to 90 seconds. And I managed to get my hands on a bat. It wasn't easy, but I'm really glad I did, really glad I broke it out, because not only is it just a joy to spin, but I feel like it's teaching me what really good prepped wool is supposed to be like. Because part of the challenge with figuring out scouring and prepping Zella is that I don't know what I'm doing. And when I say I don't know what I'm doing, part of what I don't know is I don't even know what I'm aiming for. Like, I've read about it theoretically, but I haven't felt it and smelled it and spun with it. And as soon as I started working with this wool, I was like, oh, this is what it's like when someone has known what they were doing with the processing and it's not full of weird little neps and all this kind of stuff. And I just, I feel like I'm learning as I spin. I hope eventually I'll be able to take that learning and apply it to my own wool working. But gosh, this is a good time. The other thing that happened with spinning since the last time is I discovered chain plying. I finished spinning my Shetland sock spin on my Majacraft Suzy Pro, and I was about to kind of load in another big spin, and then I thought, no, Christina, you got to be good. Practice your chain plying. So what happens is most of the yarn that I make are 2-plies, and inevitably with 2-plies you have 2 bobbins and you're plying the singles together, and you almost never have the exact same amount of singles on each bobbin, so in the end you have some leftover yarn or singles on one bobbin. And what I tend to do is just let those sit forever. But when I'm not letting them sit forever, I chain ply them. That's how I practice chain plying. And chain plying is making a 3-ply yarn And it's kind of like crocheting. You just have one piece of yarn and you put it in a loop and then you pull through that loop, kind of like doing a chain of crochet. I say that like I know what I'm talking about. I don't actually know how to crochet. But I tend to put off chain plying because I'm bad at it, and doing something that I'm really bad at sometimes makes me feel bad. But I decided to be good and to chain ply, and to my delight, I did not mind the yarn I came up with. I know it's not perfect, but for the first time I did some chain plying and I thought I'd knit with this. This is like kind of fun. So then I chain plied something else. This one was I believe this was a BFL? No, this was merino. This was a merino spin. I spun it worsted. I think it's kind of a pretty little plump chain ply. This one was a bat full of, I don't remember what kind of wool. I think it was a couple different, plus some sari silk. And this was woolen spun. But once I realized that I no longer hate my chain plying skills, I just felt like I wanted to chain ply the whole world. Didn't chain ply the whole world, but I did chain ply this, which is a full-size skein. This is a BFL silk blend that I spun up. It's from Bramble Ridge, and the colorway was, it had a name like Fruit Loops or something like that. However, it was dyed onto, I think, a gray wool, which means that the colors are beautiful and moody, which is very much my kind of thing. And I'm really happy with how this turned out. Again, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect chain ply, but this is yarn that I would be happy to knit with. I've been thinking maybe I might make myself a pair of fingerless mitts for winter out of these. My hands get cold sometimes in winter, and sometimes I like wearing fingerless mitts. A pair of fingerless mitts was the second or third project that I made when I started knitting in 2023. And those are getting a little ratty, and it would be fun to have a new pair to wear sometimes made out of beautiful yarn that I spun myself. Okay, and then another spin in progress I can't really show you, and that is because I am halfway through plying my Shetland silk sock yarn. So it's on my Ashford eSpinner 3. Half of it is plied up on the bobbin, half of it's attached to two separate bobbins, and I am not going to try to lift that up and show it to you because I know I will mess something up, so I'll have to show that off next time. I do have another spin that I was also doing on my eSpinner. Look at this. This is nothing like the kind of colors I normally spin. I'm more of a moody color kind of a person, but I have been enjoying the heck out of this. This is, all right, what the heck is this? I'm looking at my notes. This is a Rambouillet, and I didn't put it in my notes, so that's why I realized that my notes aren't going to help me here. It's Rambouillet. I bought it from Republica Unicornia, and I believe the colorway is Unicorn's Birthday Party. And even as I bought it, I was like, what am I doing? These aren't your colors. But I'm so glad I did buy it. So glad I'm spinning it, because these might not be my colors, but they are fabulous and fun, and they make me happy. I was thinking about what to do with the yarn when it's done, just because it'll be enough to knit a hat or something. And I could make myself a hat from it, but most of my other colors tend to be like this. And I'm like, I don't know, am I ever gonna wear the hat? Because it wouldn't go with anything else I was wearing. And I asked my son, who's a preteen, I said, if I finished this yarn and I made you a hat with these colors, would you wear it? And he was like, oh yeah, I would wear that. So I think eventually it's gonna become a hat for my son. And every time he wears it, I will feel some motherly glee. So that's gonna be a good end for this once it's done. All right, next I'll talk a little bit about future plans. I'm still planning to sew. I didn't end up sewing very much the last 2 weeks, even though that was a big plan of mine. And I still want to sew the same thing. I want to make some linen tunics using kind of hacking the Melba dress from Muna and Broad. And before I talk to you again, I would like to at least have cut out the pattern pieces for one of those tunics. And that's really what's been holding me back, in addition to time and just not having a ton of it for doing all the things I want to do. Also, cutting out fabric is my least favorite part. partly because I have arthritic knees and standing up that long to cut is really tough on me, partly because it stresses me out. One of the things I've discovered I like about knitting is that it does not really stress me out, because if I mess up, I can just pull out the yarn and use it again. The yarn is not ruined. Whereas if you're messing up when you're cutting fabric, well, you cannot just kind of glue the fabric back together. It's cut now, and you cut it wrong. Congratulations, you cut a hole right where you don't want a hole. It's just sort of, it's more permanent. And so while I'm doing it, I feel that stress a little bit more. I'm lucky these days because I have a better place to cut. Because of my knees, cutting on the floor like some people do is just not an option. I used to cut on a very narrow dining room table, which was frustrating. Plus it was hard because I had to take my stuff down every time we wanted to sit down and eat at the table. Then one year for his birthday, my son requested a table tennis table for the sunroom. Turns out he doesn't play a lot of table tennis, but I do not regret the purchase at all, because most of the time those tables are folded up upright, and we actually use them as a room divider. They divide the sitting area from the wool workshop in here. And then when I want to cut fabric, I just unfold the tables. They're huge, really wide, really long, and they are fantastic for laying out fabric and cutting fabric. So I always say, you know, thanks for asking for a cutting table for your mom for your birthday. That was real nice of you. So we are not getting rid of these table tennis tables anytime soon. And maybe someday someone will decide to play on them again. Okay, also I'm still thinking about my spinning plans for Tour de Fleece. I'm either gonna focus on my spindles or my e-spinner, and I really need to make a choice. If I focus on my e-spinner, I'm gonna be trying to spin more sock yarn. I've got a nice braid coming. I joined Camp Wooligan, which is the Tour de Fleece team led by Tazi and Christopher. And they have really set up a fun kind of team experience. I haven't really done Tour de Fleece before, and I definitely haven't done a team before, so I've been enjoying that. I bought their t-shirt, and I bought a braid of it's a targy blend with some other fibers that are supposed to be great for socks. So I might focus on that with my e-spinner, or I might focus on woolen spinning with my spindles. That will depend a little bit on if I feel like I have enough wool to spin woolen style on my spindles. I do if I am willing to spin any bat I have, but I don't if I want to focus on things I process myself. So we'll see. I'm still playing with it. It's all in fun, so I'm not stressed out about it. Also, I want to try really hard to finish my test net, of course, that I was already talking about, and I really want to keep working on Toad. I'm not saying by next time I'm going to have him 100% done, but I would at least like Toad to have eyes the next time I talk to you. That would be nice. Also, my son has requested some mending. Last summer, I participated in the first West Knit mystery sock knit along, and very early on in the process, he saw the socks and saw how wild they were going to be, and he was kind of like, so what do you think about knitting those for me? And I did. I decided I would, and I was so glad I did, because he ended up wearing them all winter as his house slippers. So I got to see them on him every day. I really felt like they were appreciated, and he enjoyed how wild they were. But since he wore them every day all winter long, they've got a big hole in one of the toes. And he asked me recently, is there a way to fix this hole? Because I would actually wear them sometimes in the early morning still, even though it's summer, if there wasn't a big hole in them. So I said I would mend it. I actually recently took a Zoom mending workshop. So in theory, this is a thing I know how to do, darning a sock. So I'm gonna do that because I would like those socks to see some more life. And then also, I think there's going to be a second mystery sock knit along in July, starting I believe on the 9th. And I'm gonna try to participate in that one again. And again, I asked my son, do you want another pair of wild and crazy socks? And he was like, yes, please. So those will be for him. You know, it's funny, I think of myself as someone who mostly knits for myself, but right now, a lot of my projects have to do with my son and then the sweater I'm knitting for my husband. So I may have to reassess that self-image. I have more things I would like to get done before next time, but I'm trying to be a tiny bit realistic, so I'll just stop my list there because clearly I'm not going to have time to get more than that done. It's just the way it is. And then finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about mental health and crafting because that's an interest of mine. You could call it a special interest of mine. I've been doing a lot of thinking and reading about it and contemplating as I craft. And one of my recent realizations about myself that kind of came through crafting was the realization that I'm not lazy, and also related to that I probably have ADHD. It kind of came about because I've got a couple different kinds of therapists, and one of them, I had a session with her and I was knitting as we talked, and she described me as a person who's always doing something, who's always busy. And I kind of stopped and corrected her, and I was like, no, I am a deeply lazy person. That's kind of who I am. And she kind of looked at me and she just said, no, you're not. And she listed all the kind of things that I talk about doing. She said, you are always doing something. Even if you're just sitting there, you're thinking deeply about something, and that's doing something. You are a busy person. And I thought about that after the session, and I just realized, oh, I'm not lazy, and yet that is a thing I've truly believed about myself my whole life. And when I thought about why, I realized it's related to my PTSD. I did experience some childhood abuse, and felt like one of the more minor parts of it, but one of the things that was true is I really think I was told I was lazy almost every day of my life. I'm not always in a mean way, sometimes kind of in a joking way. We would laugh about how lazy I was, but also sometimes in a mean, yelling way. And as an adult, as I've been processing all this stuff, I kind of thought I had rooted out all the wrong messages I'd been given about myself, but apparently I'd missed that one. It just seemed so a part of who I was that it took until age 50 to have someone tell me, no, you are not lazy. Why do you think you're lazy? And that was a big realization. And I got to it partly through my crafting because I realized, I might not be spending all of my time doing, I'm not writing 8 hours a day, and I don't take breaks by cleaning the house and sort of things that would count in part of my head as real work. But I'm always doing something, and it's okay to be the way I am. But it did also lead to me realizing that my pattern of allowing myself to follow my joy and having these periods of hyper-focus that then jump to something else and hyper-focusing on that reminds me very much of what I know about ADHD, which I know about because my son has ADHD, and it just sort of occurred to me, oh, well, I guess I may have an idea of where he got that from. So I don't have any grand conclusions about it other than there's real power in celebrating yourself and in understanding yourself. And I am really trying to understand who I am and to celebrate who I am, while also trying to help myself finish things that I start every now and then, because I do get an awful lot of joy from finishing things. So I'd like to do that sometimes too. Also related to mental health and crafting is yesterday I had a different therapy session with a different therapist. We talked about some hard stuff, and the whole time we were talking, I was spinning on this beautiful tulip spindle. And I laughed and I told her I was probably the first patient she'd ever had who was doing support spinning the whole time they talked on their Zoom session. And she was like, yeah, you were. And it was cool because we talked about some hard things related to abuse, related to PTSD and trauma. But the whole time I was working with this beautiful fiber on this beautiful spindle. And even as some of the stuff was hard, I was feeling joy the whole time too, because I was enjoying this process so much. And the fact that I have a thing that can bring me calm and joy when I'm talking about something hard is so, I don't even know the right word for it. It's just, it's powerful, it's delightful, it makes me feel lucky. I don't really know how I would function without having these kind of things to do. All the time if I want. It just makes my life so much better. As a kid and still as an adult, I was always chewing on my fingernails and my fingers, and it was a thing that I was criticized for a lot. That's gross. Stop that. It is gross. I'm sorry. I try not to do it when other people are looking, but I can't seem to completely stop. But I kind of have realized part of why I did that was that as a kid, I desperately needed a fidget. And that was before fidget toys were really a thing, or people understood that as a legitimate need. And so I made my own hands into a fidget. But these days, as an adult, one, I can help my son have more productive fidgets. He's got like 2 giant bins on a desk in our kitchen just full of fidget toys that he can pull out whenever he wants. But also, as an adult, I have some of the most glorious fidget toys you could ever ask for. And gosh, they're fun. I mean, it's a piece of art as well as a tool. And that's one of my very favorite kinds of art, I think. So I'm going to wrap up the episode there. I've been talking for about 40 minutes. I'm trying to release an episode every 2 weeks or so. It probably won't be exact, but I'm doing my best. Please do like, subscribe, comment. I got some lovely comments last time, and that was so fun. I mean, a huge reason why I decided to start this podcast is I wanted to take part in the conversation that's out there about fiber arts. And having people comment and responding to them really gives me great satisfaction and joy, because it lets me know that I am a part of that conversation, and I'm thankful for that. Thank you to the 47 people who are now subscribed. Like I said last time, having people subscribe to this helps me feel like I'm talking to you and not just to my phone like a weirdo. So thank you. Really happy that you're all here. I hope you watch and enjoy the episode. Thank you again to David Wilson, the graphic designer who made my logo that I love so much. Someday I'm going to learn how to edit properly so that I can put it in a little square down at the bottom at the beginning and the end of my podcast. And thank you again to the very specific you, whoever you may be, who has spent 41 minutes with me hearing me talk about fiber arts. I hope you were maybe drinking some tea or some coffee. I hope maybe you had some knitting or some stitching or something to do. And thanks for spending this morning with me. It was about 6 a.m. when I started. It's closing in on 7 a.m. now, and the light is rising for the morning. Pretty soon, this sitting room in my sunroom will not be comfortable anymore. It'll be too hot, but right now it is perfect. And I'm glad that I spent this perfect 40-some minutes with you. I'll include links in the info area beneath, including links to where else you can find me. You can find me at my author website, KristinaSocorroJovovich.com. It has a fairly neglected blog, but its most interesting part, I think, is there's a page that has links to things that I've had published online. So if you're interested in reading more, especially more of my memoir experiences with my bipolar, things like that, you can find those online. And then also you can find me on Instagram at @CJovovich. I'll include a link to that as well. And with that, I will talk to you in about 2 weeks or so. Thank you.